Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, coming out in the rain. I'm Eli Nyberger. I'm director of the Ann Arbor District Library. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here tonight. We have a number of guests with us, and we'll introduce them in just a moment. But before we do that, I want to remind you, please silence your cell phones. If you need a restroom, they're over behind you, across the lobby. And we are streaming this event tonight and recording it as well. So that will be available later for those of you who want to know more about this afterwards. So I want to introduce you to our panel tonight. First of all, we have David Wolinsky, who is the author of the book, The Hivemind Swarmed, which is available for sale from Literati. David was once an editor at the Onion years ago, and then became a oral historian and author, and documentary researcher. He did a big project called Don't Die on the web at nodon'tdie.com. A huge series of oral history interviews with people in the gaming industry about how Gamergate affected them. And that became the basis for the book that you see here tonight. And also with us today is Adam Saltzman. Adam was the developer of the iPhone legend Cannibalt back in the day, and he and Becca Saltzman founded the video game studio Finji, which is located right here in Michigan. Has produced a lot of incredible titles over the past few years. And also with us is Lily Valine, who is a local software developer, game developer. Her bio on her website is "Cool women doing cool things" is what the games are about. Boss Game is one of the titles that she made, and she also made one of the games for the Ann Arbor 200 Bicentennial Project. We had a series of 3 games about Dr. Chase, and she made the one where Dr. Chase dies. No spoiler, he lived a long time ago. So, please join me in welcoming our panel. All right, so I'm going to ask some questions to get this rolling, and then we will definitely have time for your questions if you have some as we go. But first, I'd like to start by asking David, if you want to tell us a little bit about the book and how the book came to be.
The very long story short is my background is entertainment journalism, and I'm sure we'll get into what Gamergate was, but when it started, I had a journalist's toolbox and skills, and I was interested in writing articles about this really weird, really scary, really dark thing happening on Twitter, coming from other corners of the internet that on the surface of it seemed to be all about video games and sexism and misogyny, and that was certainly an element of it. But there was this other really dark stuff being made clear about the way the internet works and what is wrong with social media, which is stuff we kind of all take for granted as understanding today. And I just started interviewing people to try to pitch articles because I felt like the journalism at the time was sort of not reductive, but sort of just really eager to, what are you going to do? Gamers are really disgusting and bad, and this is the end of the story. I sort of felt like that was a dangerous way to treat that story, which is super complicated, but basically because I never was able to successfully pitch an article anywhere because I think people were really interested in the narrative of just let's blame gamers and move on. I kept finding other angles, other parallels, other conversations I wanted to have that I mean, sitting next to me is one person I had a conversation with. In the audience, I see at least 1 or 2 other people I've had conversations with, where I think just this really weird thing that happened online opened up a lot of questions for a lot of people. And I kept asking them, and over the years, because it couldn't seem to get in any journalism place, it wound up, I had no idea it was going to turn into a book. But when you produce a lot of material, it's clear it's something. So that's how it became a book.
Excellent, thank you. So Adam, why don't you tell us a little bit about your road into gaming and game development and how Gamergate affected you?
Yeah, happily. I was born in Ypsi, and I lived in Ann Arbor until I was 4 years old, and then I moved to the middle of nowhere, about an hour west of here, truly middle of nowhere, and it was awesome. And I came back and went to school here, and while I lived in the middle of nowhere, though, I started to get very big time hooked on video games. I was really attracted to computers when I was like 2, or so I'm told, or there is documentation of this happening. I had a friend whose parents were divorced, so he had really good Nintendo games, and I would go over there and immediately wanted to make games. Like when I was 6 years old, I was with graph paper, like trying to draw little tile maps of like, oh, there should be a Mario level like this, and it would be insane. But it didn't seem like there was a way to do that. And then eventually I got my hands on a Doom level editor, and that was like a really big deal. It was also really hard to do. You had to put a check in an envelope and send it to this guy in Vermont, and then he would mail you back physical floppy disks that you would then like chunk and like install piece by piece in your computer. But then you could make your own Doom levels, and I went pretty nuts for that. And then when I was in school here, started making actual kind of standalone games that were my own design with my own artwork in them. And at that point, it wasn't really clear what to do next. There was such a thing as people making, this was in the mid 2000s, maybe 2005. So there was such a thing as indie games or games made by solo developers. That was happening sometimes, but there wasn't a lot of that. But the internet was starting to change that some. You could get weird Japanese indie games. You could download them, and you could also meet other people online who wanted to do this too, and you tried to figure it out with each other. And ultimately, it was this ancient form of web technology called Flash, where I found my footing and I found a fun community, and I'm still friends with a lot of people from that era, and we still make games and meet up and talk about what we do. Now we run a sort of boutique indie publisher, and we get to work on games like Tunic and Night in the Woods and things like that. So that's a weird version of the road, but that's part of it. And I would say Gamergate affected me badly, but it was also a learning experience. And we can probably get more into that. But I was right there. A lot of the people who were, in terms of the now meaningless nugget of things that kicked everything off, many of those people were some of my closest friends. And so I wasn't targeted because essentially I'm a reasonably comfortable cis white male who has made successful action games and was well-liked online, so I was not really vulnerable or a target, but friends of mine who are not in that position had an interesting year or two, and I learned a lot. I'll hold it there for now.
And Lily, how about you? How did you find your way into this career, and how did Gamergate affect you?
Yeah, sure. So it's not terribly dissimilar story. I think I stumbled into playing, Mario 3 when I was a very young kid, and I spent a lot of notebooks filling them up with coins and like trying to draw levels. My uncle installed Doom 2 on my computer, or on my parents' computer rather, without telling them, and then taught me like the DOS prompt how to get to Doom 2 so I could play it when they weren't looking. So I did that, and then mostly like I liked making like kind of like pen and paper games to play with friends. But eventually I found out about this software. It was an illegal crack of RPG Maker 95 done by a Russian guy named Don Miguel. And I stumbled onto that like via AOL somehow, downloaded that, and realized you could use that to make like essentially like Dragon Quest kind of games. And so I started making that and like learning how to like make a treasure chest open or whatever. And that's kind of how I actually stumbled into like learning how to code and program, was like the basic like logic of making treasure chests work or what have you. And then at some point it kind of hit me. I was like, oh, this is probably how like actual game developers also have things like this to help them make games. So I found my way into like RPG Maker forums and like asked people how to help, or like for help on like how you should make things work or how to approach certain things, and we'd get into long discussions about game design or whatever else. But because it was a forum, like within the years of like between, when I was in high school or college, between 2000, 2015 or so, people would eventually get into more off-topic political discussions, things like you start to kind of see the edges of people with strong opinions on things, whether it's women in games or what have you, that you could sort of see little fraying edges that would eventually lead to something like Gamergate. When Gamergate like actually, I don't want to say kicked off, that sounds weird. When Gamergate kind of happened, I was more or less making like weird little freeware games, and I didn't really have anyone paying attention to me, so I was never really personally affected. For me, it was more of a moment to see, I think up until that point, I wouldn't say I was like politically neutral, but I think I wasn't as aware of things people went through and the ways certain very niche communities felt strongly in bad ways about people. And I think that brought a lot of that to light in a very heavy-handed way that was very clear that, like, this is not something that I would ever want to be a part of, like, aware, you know what I mean? Like, it was one of those things where I was like, oh, this is something horrible happening. And, like, there's, like, people in my life I realized, like, I probably shouldn't keep folks like this around anymore in adjacent sort of, you know, whether it's World of Warcraft guilds or what have you. So I would say it was very indirectly, but it was, you know, interesting to see from afar, to see people like me or whoever getting suddenly just an unbelievably difficult amount of pressure and hatred and things like that. So.
If I can just add one quick thing. I mean, I sort of talked about media as if it was like one big monolith, but when Gamergate happened, I know we haven't really defined what it is yet, but because it was this thing, I'll say it kicked off, it's fine. When it kicked off in what seemed to be like the video game corner of the internet doesn't have corners. We have no good language for talking about the internet. I think a lot of gaming media, my memory of it is, anyway, it was a lot of ostriching and a lot of assuming what seemed to be like a few very vitriolic, targeted harassment campaigns against a few individuals. There was this assumption that these were isolated incidents and that it would sort of blow over, and it wasn't really challenged, and as a result, it really got worse and worse and worse. And I mean, maybe I hate to put you on the spot. You were explaining to me far better than I could the way like game design plays into the way that the mechanics of what Gamergate was got optimized.
Yeah.
Which is maybe in 2025 a more helpful way to talk about it versus like,
I think so. I
yeah.
think there's a couple of things. Like one, so I guess, who is here because you saw somewhere online that somebody said, you know, Gamergate is related to current political thing? Is that something that people have heard or whatever? Yeah, somewhat, right? So I'm not going to go directly into that, but I did want to say something that is common, I think, about now and when the party really got started in 2014 is it's not kicking off anymore. It's more. Yes.
but it's a party that got started that like
Yeah.
everyone was invited to, and nobody wanted to go to.
Right.
You
Some
were-
people
I saw
did.
some kids-
Some people
well,
did.
nobody here
But,
probably, but yeah, you're right.
But the thing about the reaction in press and journalism that was scary and weird if you were in the middle of it at the time is something that happens now, which is assuming that there is a nugget of truth in the campaign, in this vocal minority thing, that something about what they're saying must be true in some way, or we know part of it is sort of true, and then it would be covered with that more as the premise. Like, it would be like this parade of people marched into your house, vandalized everything, and then on the way out, they said something about global warming. So we're going to cover this mostly from a global warming angle, and we're going to ignore all of the vandalism and everything else that happened. And that part was really weird if you were in the midst of it, because you felt like, oh, this is odd, because like I was focused on all the like material harm and bad faith arguments and all of that stuff, but everybody is kind of like not trying to normalize it exactly, but they're trying to find a way to talk about it that made sense, almost, but it didn't, and so you couldn't really, and or a thing that also happens now is I think if you wanted to talk about it then in a way that made sense, you had to know so much stupid internet stuff.
Yeah.
You had to know what this one secret forum was and who this jerk guy was from this other thing, and you had to know this other thing. You had to know like the breadth of cultural knowledge that you needed. So I think it was a tricky place to be in if you were journalism or press at the time. And not to excuse them doing what I think was a genuinely bad job of trying to figure out what was going on, but it was non-trivial, I think.
Right.
And so there was maybe a temptation to be like, this piece of it makes sense to me, so I'm going to cover that part. The rest of this, I can't really figure out, but probably it's okay or something.
Yeah, I mean, all this really confusing shit just happened, and there was no real outlet for the culture or the series of subcultures.
And it often wasn't like now, it's often not that confusing to do. You just have to remember to say the things that are true and the differences between what happened or whatever, but there's pressure to do that. If you didn't do that, then it would, if you were in the midst, if you were like, or your friends were in the midst, or you were watching this thing unfold, and then voices that were seen as authorities in your community, their main involvement would be, well, they might have a point. We really should, it should be a conversation. It should be a dialogue. And then you'd be going like, well, this one shouldn't. Like the topic you're talking about is fine, but let's not talk about it in this context with these people, because that's not what they're doing. They're doing a different thing.
I don't know if we're muddying it or clearing it up. But
That's a great, I don't know.
The main thrust is misogyny and conspiracy theories and tapping into these features that the social internet always had, but we didn't know.
I think there's something to what you said, Adam, about the idea that we have to engage with it as a conversation in a way that obviously like lends it legitimacy, and you can obviously that is carried through forward to today, where you can see it with very many any political argument where you would think that it wouldn't have to be a conversation, and yet there are lots of things where we're like, well, we have to talk about both sides of this, where I think there's a tendency to want to kind of try and take, if you consider, I don't want to say quote unquote sides of Gamergate, right? There's clearly a very lowbrow, aggressive, violent side of it, and then there's another side that I think wants to try and take like a very high road approach to saying like, look, we're going to dismiss this with evidence and like calm discussion and a debate. When I think you're right, where you're going and watching people online, calling each other slurs or like making bomb threats or things like that, and you go, I don't think this needs to be a discussion. Actually, like I don't think we need to have like a really strong. I think you could say a lot of people are reporting that this is the case. However, this is not the case. There's simply a series of people who are trying to do extremely violent, heinous things, and then a series of people who are the recipient of that, I suppose.
Yeah, and I guess maybe to help clarify, like the specifics, one of the specifics in 2014 was there was this bizarre, sudden, misogynistic kind of outrage campaign, and there was a bunch of dogpiling on the internet, and it seemed like it was kind of restricted to one community, and then eventually somebody found this magic phrase, which was ethics in gaming journalism. And they grabbed this thing, and suddenly it wasn't just a handful of small communities. They had felt like, oh, this is a capital I issue, and that was where it got really weird if you had been kind of following along or paying attention, because that was when journalists would start going, let's weigh in on this topic, and it was like, like I know people who work in ethics and gaming journalism. We're the guy Simon Parkin who wrote he did the investigation into game companies that were paying arms manufacturers to use the licenses from their real guns to sell their gun video games. That's like, there are people that work in ethics and gaming journalism. Like they do incredible work. It's a great topic. You should talk about it. But when chuds show up that hate women and they say, it's not about that, it's about this other topic that we have sort of like grabbed and have wallpapered this thing in, then journalists say, oh, let's talk about the thing they wallpapered their terrible thing in. That's the disconnect, and that's the thing that makes, if you happen to be near the middle of the thing, you rapidly begin to feel crazy, and then when that happens at a national scale in 2016, 2017, you have the exact same feeling because you open up CNN and they're doing the exact same thing. They're going like, oh, there's the wallpaper sent out from the fascists. Let's talk about the wallpaper or the wrapping that they've put on this thing. And it's like, how can that be what? We already did this. This was 3 years ago and everybody knew it was crazy then. And so anyway, that's the specific thing. The specific thing that was intense for me about the journalism approach to this kind of thing was that it was latching on to this tepid excuse, and then that was the thing that got centered somehow. And so you'd be going, what about all the other stuff? And they'd be like, no, the tepid excuse. That's what we got to talk about.
Well, because the first weapon of any psyop is good faith, right? It's always the first thing to get weaponized, right? And I think what's most interesting, and going back to something that David said, is it's like often it's just like, oh, those gamers, those toxic gamers, right? But it's like, was it really necessary? It lived in the gaming subculture, but to what extent, we've seen this sort of thing in other fandoms, and in many cases it's the same people, right? And now they're Star Wars fans, and now they don't like who's in The Last Jedi, or any one of the. So, David, maybe you can speak to what extent you feel that the growth of Gamergate as a harassment campaign relied upon its roots in the gaming community, as opposed to other fandoms. What made gaming unique, if it was?
Maybe, I think it's something that may not make a lot of sense today, but historically, video game fandom was sort of proud about being apolitical, proud about, there's all these things said about like, oh, the popularity of video games is their power fantasies and their ways to escape real life. And it's weird because I think it's very tempting to think of a fandom identity as another monolith. And I don't think any of our identities, we're the sum total of all the experiences we've had in our lives. But for some reason, people who are very passionate about video games and people who are, as we say, extremely online, they sort of, I don't even want to say they, but there's a tendency for some people in that group that enjoys that hobby, which is really what we mean when we say gamer, that they don't care about the rest of the world. They don't want anything to do with the rest of the world. They have found their thing that they like, and they're sort of incurious about everything else. It's to the exclusion of everything else.
I think sometimes, though, I think soccer fans can be the same way, right? But I think, increasingly I'm suspicious that gamer's kind of a light identity.
Yeah.
That you can get to from a bunch of different avenues. So if you collect arcade games, you still have your mom's Game Boy. You were in World of Warcraft Guild with your manager because that replaced golf for a while in the 2010s, and it was weird. Or you you only play imported Japanese indie games, or you only play Fortnite, or you only play Minecraft. There's this huge banner that goes real young, right? So I think even if you have, I think there's a good chance that video games maybe tends to be a little more insular community in different ways, but I think a big part of it, to like the question in some way, like I think there are chuds in every community, every fandom has these people in it, but what would allow something to spread like that? And I think one of the things is like that this, I mean, there's so many people who don't think of themselves as gamers, but they love games, right? And I think they're just like one step away. Like you just play so much Candy Crush, like you're one step away from that gamer identity. You can have it in like a second. You can join that club. It doesn't always feel like it, but I think like you if you see a political thing that you identify with strongly, and it's coming from people who also maybe love a game that you love, now. You know, you're seeing like, oh, that's a connection for me. That's a thing that I can have. That's a thing that I can participate in. And I think that's maybe something that enables this like to happen.
I think there's like a lot of identity that comes with being into video games, and especially back in that time, right? I think I don't think it's crazy to say that like for a long time, video games were in very many ways marketed as like a male hobby, right? And a very specific hobby for a specific subset of people. Obviously, that was never actually the case. It just kind of got pushed in that way, and plenty of people.
The way the MBAs could understand it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think that's people build their identity over things they like, right? Like people are Trekkies or whatever, and that's not necessarily a bad thing until it gets encroached upon by, if people feel like their identity is being encroached upon by these things that they had that were set in stone views they had of the world that have been encroached by the fact that, let's say someone makes a video about like how maybe games could be less misogynist or something like that, and suddenly it feels like an attack when it like doesn't necessarily have to be. It's just like maybe I should think about things. I haven't considered these things about myself or these things about this thing that I love or whatever. Because I think very quickly, right, like Gamergate didn't stay as a gaming thing for long. It very quickly became about, because like the Ghostbusters movie came out, or whatever else, like anything that happened at that time that was just like an excuse to pick on, essentially the idea of someone's nostalgia being ruined or what have you. Like, I think that makes sense that it happens in gaming because gaming happened to be I don't think movies, for example, like the concept of movies as a medium was quite as insular as gaming had this, at least subsets and niches of gaming had in that same way. But I mean, I think once that fuse got lit, it spread very quickly.
I mean, I think it's sort of a.
I was gonna say, I agree. I think it was fast. Like, I don't know that. I mean, it was weeks from basically an incredibly bad public breakup to Hollywood celebrities from beloved sci-fi franchises weighing in as and identifying as having been victimized by either women in games or ethics in gaming journals. Or like they were I am Spartacus. It was a matter of weeks, right? So there was no, like, I think the fact that it's hard for me to guess what was special about gaming, and that's why I sometimes think about it as like, oh, maybe that was vectors, that was a way to spread quickly, but it stopped being about video games and gamers so fast, and that like some of the language stayed in there, or like flare-ups would kind of originate from there still, but the idea of it as this conservatives taking back online something, 6 weeks or something like that. It was bonkers.
I mean, I think like if we want to continue the fuse metaphor, like the terrible metaphors all around, the sulfur in the air, let's say, or the reason it was so flammable to begin with, I think is, first of all, it's kind of weird this word gamer exists. We don't have stuff like that for like, do you like movies? There's no word that's like that, and I think maybe part of that is because...
I do think of myself as a movier.
Movier, yeah.
Yeah.
A buff, I think is what they're called, film buff. And maybe there's some truth to like, well, video games people sink a lot of hours into them, maybe 40 hours on one just to complete it once. You can think about it like a lot of hours are sunk into spending time with the thing in a way that, maybe books also take 40 hours, so maybe that doesn't hold. But the thing that is unique about video games, well, that's not true either. Video games have long just sort of been in the crosshairs of like moral panics, media panics. They were blamed for bad grades. They were blamed for school shootings back when those used to be not routine occurrences. But also it was a medium and an industry that used to be under constant threat. Like there was this famous Atari E.T. game that did so poorly that it sunk the entire industry that set the scene for Nintendo to step in and sort of standardize things. And so along with that, there was this long history of gamers thinking, and this I think is true to use the word gamers in this context, is like, we have to protect this medium. We have to make sure it doesn't fall apart again. And that, to me, I remember like early days of Gamergate. It felt a little bit like McCarthyism. It felt a little bit like that of like, oh shit, but that's also a group of people who misunderstood like video games have historically, and I think still are, like a haven for people who don't quite fit in. And so it's this like weird revisionist history of, yes, because of the way it was marketed, but also it's like people who claim to be hardcore fans of it, not even knowing the history of the thing itself.
Well, and I think this is a thing that comes through today also, is that reaction, the sort of victim narrative. Like we're just video gamers, and everybody's going to come get our stuff, and they're going to take our stuff away. But a community made up of people who sometimes have, 10 million followers on YouTube, or they've got these, big expensive gaming rigs, and like these are people who, and their thing, their fandom, the thing that they identify as like wanting to protect, is like a $1 trillion industry, right? So I think you're totally right. I think like the reaction came from a place of, oh no, the little thing that only me and my friends like is under attack, and that's just at odds with the reality of this being, at the time, the largest entertainment industry on the planet, only getting bigger every day, and in no danger of anything except bad taste, maybe.
There's one thing that appears fairly early in the book, which I think is IRC logs from some of the
The
planners.
planning,
Yes.
yeah, that was fun to do for the audiobook,
Yeah. It was a very
which I read. That part, yes.
you read that part.
That was fun. Yeah.
It's very
Not really,
eye-opening
not really.
seeing inside the belly of the beast like that. And do you think that like from what you've seen, was the whole thing an op all the way along, or did it escape the petri dish at some point?
I think that's an important thing to bring up, because I think looking back, it's very tempting to say, so like, okay, there's this word gamer, and now there's this other word, Gamergator, which is people on a variety of different facets that were basically designed to confuse but they didn't know what was going to happen. Like we look back on it, it's like, oh, of course they knew. They were cementing like the pipeline for reactionaries and how to raise existential threats and get people mad about it. They sort of like stumbled into it, and I don't know. I mean, the way I talk about it now, and I apologize because I know I said this on an email that you were on, but I think about it a lot as just like it was this, well, yeah, this continues, the fuse and the sulfur, great. It has the illusion of making sense now.
Yeah, I think there were like two. I think there was two things happening. There was this like bizarre, grody, sort of filthy op, but the op was just do as much damage as you can as fast as you can. That was about it. And then something else was happening that I still think wasn't just Gamergate, but was also Ferguson at the time.
Right.
Which was because all of this unfolds, internet history nerd time, this is within like a year or two of Arab Spring. So social media pre-Arab Spring and post-Arab Spring is kind of different, because pre-Arab Spring, it's just like
Here's
the
my
only
sandwich.
way. Yeah, the only way people talk about social media is like, my friend went to the toilet and talked about his sandwich. This is stupid. And then post-Arab Spring, it's social media is the most important thing to humanity and civilization, and it's saving the world every day, right? Something happens within the next year or two where a machine, a mechanism, a series of systems that are able to evolve really rapidly in real time and able to see what, if we phrase this attack this way, this is the engagement. If we phrase this attack this way, this is the engagement. If we do this way, this is the engagement. So now, like, if you're doing this in newspapers, your turnaround time is like days, and now it's seconds. So I think a post-Arab Spring social media world is situated to capitalize on something that starts as the most smash and grab. The op part is smash and grab, no brains, destruction. And then there's something else around it that has maybe not even a conscious system, but I just saw the headline. I saw a great headline today that was something like, Mr. Beast, my 2 least popular videos this year were the ones where I actually helped people, something like that. But which is like, this is somebody who, you know, their whole life is making content, people are reacting to the content, I'm measuring that engagement, I'm deciding what to do with that, right? So like, but the idea that that is a lever that changes how parts of the world work, that is something that we don't have until right after Arab Spring, and we have this very, very cynical, rapid weaponization of that happening within like a year, basically.
Right.
And Gamergate and Ferguson are, I think, side by side, people figuring out how to make that work.
Right. I mean, all of this stuff benefits from the way the internet right now functions and is built, which is not like a neutral law of nature, but a way our species built this system, which is it's optimized for clicks and what drives clicks. And it's weird, the stuff with media, because it sort of mirrors some of it. And it's just that I think like these tactics, the way they scale on these platforms now to the point where people know exactly how to do it, and it will have a half-life of like a couple seconds. But yeah, I mean, I just think of Gamergate as this moment where the canary in the coal mine died, and then we just kept digging for another decade.
Well, it's interesting to talk about it as a psyop, because I remember reading the IRC chat logs like ages ago now, and you can see to some extent that like while there are people planning it, there's clearly a lot of people involved who just want to be part of something that they think will be, I'm going to say, fun, and they're going to get really into it and cause a lot of problems, and just don't really have the general sense of like, oh, this is hurting other people, right? Or I'm contributing to something that's hurting other people. And that's, you know, that has been on the internet since long before Gamergate, right? That's always been a thing on 4chan or whatever, different subforums, right? People cause each other, you know, people group up and gang up on someone on the internet. I do think that it is interesting to talk about it in terms of post-Arab Spring, because I think a big part of what changed Gamergate, and kind of like you mentioned, is that it got picked up by celebrities. And you can name the list of political pundits who made their careers off of Gamergate, essentially, who essentially took it and said, like, you know, here's what essentially like 4chan or a group of people in these niche spheres who just want to attack a few people and cause problems, and we think we can take this and make our bread off it, right? And they take it and they, you know, you read like Breitbart articles of that era, and they're all trying to capitalize off, you know, Gamergate, and then eventually like Me Too or anything else like that. And it's funny because I think you're right in terms of like when you see how that Gamergate, I don't want to say happened naturally, but kind of happened out of this culmination of things that kind of came together, not unintentionally, but not with the intention of creating what it did.
Right.
I think whatever the thing that happened a year or two ago where somebody, like specific people tried to start Gamergate too, and it, you know, both started and died it was a very different thing. But that was very much people trying to mimic that level of like, I'm going to make everyone mad about something and cause havoc and also use that to promote my career.
I mean, it's like a game, right? Like that's the thing. Like the early op is run like it's a game, and the early stuff spinning out around that is run like a game. And we used to, when we were still figuring out what Twitter was, we used to talk about it like it was an MMO. It'd be like you log on, you have like your guild, which is your friends who are cool, and then you have like a guild that you don't like on there, and then you get points based on the actions that you do in the game. Like we kind of took it for granted in a way that it was a game. And so you have people whose a lot of their life is like mine, defined by games and loving games, and they start a very bad little game, and that spins out into another thing, and then that ends up metastasizing on a platform that is set up like a game. And that I know that means something. I know that those things are connected somehow. It's hard for me to put exactly into words what that is, but I see that happen, and I see that make sense.
It's like with the reason it's called Gamergate, like they said about Watergate, these weren't very bright guys and things got a little out of hand.
Well, I think that's exactly the point, is like, the internet then and now just has so many different places things can bleed into and spill into. And I remember, so I've done basically interviewing ever since Gamergate happened about it, looking at it from a lot of different angles. And one thing that comes to mind is like in the BBS era, much earlier internet, I mean, people would start shit or there would be some drama, but it would be like one-to-one, and people
It wasn't
would just
broadcast media.
but also like people would just like, this guy's a jerk, and like turned off the modem and like went and had dinner. There was nowhere else for it to go,
You knew the people you were talking to back then half the time, right? Like I remember getting into, political arguments about like gay rights on the RPG Maker forum or whatever. But it was always like the same 3 people posting and they just had like a little bit, and every once in a while they'd try and start trouble, and everyone would be like, all right, we got to suspend them for a week again or whatever, or ban them, and they'd come back. But like, you knew who they were. It was a very small, contained thing.
And it's an interesting phase transition from, traditional broadcast media to social media, where broadcast media was primarily incentivized by this kind of made-up metric of viewership, right? What your share was, which was based on this very small sample, and it was its own little thing. And then when it moved to social media, all of a sudden, the people at the other end could talk back. And then you started incentivizing that, right? So to what extent do you think that what happened here was the fault of the platforms, as a result of the way they approach moderation, the way they approach incentivization?
Is there a number higher than 100%?
Right.
Yeah, I had similar answer. I mean, it's weird. Like in terms of media history, like I think there's a bunch of steps. You have the step from regular broadcast television to 24-hour news, where you have a similar kind of like, oh, we got to do something for engagement. We have to just keep making sounds, and for the numbers to do X, Y, or Z. So I think you can see an arc or a trend. But I do think, I mean, my trying to occasionally comfort friends. We have a rule in some of my friend groups that's don't post anything on social media that you wouldn't want to talk to an idiot about, which is a little harsh and judgmental, but also is essentially a reasonable expectation. Like that's going to happen. But I try to push on that a little bit, and I've thought about it a lot. And I really think there are things in the design, as a game designer, if I look at Twitter as an MMO, I go, there's a couple of really bad design choices here that are designed to make this worse. That's the only thing that they do. And quote tweet or quote post is a really, really easy one that you can look at as a systems nerd, as a game designer, and go, this is bad. Like this should be patched out of the game. It's OP, it ruins the meta, it's no good, it has to go. And because really, like, the will achieve nothing, and so that's why I haven't done it yet thing I'd love to do is make a Chrome plugin that instead of the quote tweet or quote post or the little thing, the label says take out of context. That's all it says. And you can press the take out of context button to take something out of context and turn it into something else that, like we've talked about before, is a little bit like taxidermy. So back in the day, if you before there were zoos, only started existing in like the early 1900s, and so if you wanted to see animals that you couldn't get to physically, you had to go to the museum to see taxidermy. That was like the closest thing to a real animal. But it's not a real animal. It's a thing, but it is special for being made out of real animal parts, you know. And I think to me that's like take out of context button is just like that. It's like, oh, somebody said a real thing that was situated in realness and was based in truth, but I've taken it and I've made this bad taxidermy weasel out of it.
It's 90% sawdust.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. The fact that it has real weasel parts in it is important still. That does matter somehow. So this take out of context button is special because if there's just a lie button, that's somehow different and it doesn't work in our brains the same way. And I think the take out of context button does something really special and really venomous, and that's my game design gripe about how this platform is designed and what could make this work this way so quickly. The instant feedback about engagement combined with the primary interaction being to decontextualize things or recontextualize things. That's obviously insanely powerful, but Spider-Man rule applies here big time.
If I can come at it from another angle too, I think for most of our species' existence, like one-to-one communication has been sort of what we're used to handling. And so it may not be great to be aware of what thousands and millions of people are thinking every second, every day. And that has to play a role here too, I would think.
Yeah, I think even jump in whenever, but I think my community, what we've ended up, designers like me who want to sort of be in public sometimes, but also it's terrifying and starting to, Spider-Man rules starting to apply, great power, great responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. Really the idea that private speech and public speech are different at all, I think is something that the platforms are also designed to obscure and to obfuscate and to blur the line on in lots and lots of little ways. And then I think that feeds back into having a take out of context button. So now you have designed a multiplayer game that has this take out of context button and is constantly going like, you should do this because it's basically just you and your friends, but it might be on the news later, but it might, and like there's no nothing, like it's such a blurry, and I think really obviously intentionally blurry, complicated thing to engage with. And if you don't have a ton of media literacy or media training, or maybe like your partner wasn't literally trained in PR at U of M and working for things here, like the idea that private speech in public, because like normally we have a different thing for that. There's like, you have to do a press conference, or you're doing a panel thing like this, or you're doing a thing, and that's different from the dumb thing that you said to your friend at the bar last night. And those are like, these are these totally separate spheres. And then we have this thing that's like in your pocket going like, I'm sort of private and sort of public and complicated, and I can take, like, it's just like,
I had a conversation, if that's the word for it, with ChatGPT a couple months ago, which is just a sane thing to say nowadays. But I was describing my behavior online and how I don't really use social media. I don't really want to be sharing all my thoughts all day long with other people. And I was just asking it like, well, what do you make of this? And ChatGPT was like, well, you shouldn't be so embarrassed about what your thoughts are. And I was like, well, what if it's like no one's business? And I think they have to like earn my trust to hear this.
Yeah, I think it is interesting to try and compose a small sentence of 200 characters or so and cover every possible way anyone could interpret that. Because the first time that ends up in some article on Polygon or whatever, and someone just tells you like, oh, by the way, that thing you posted last night is like part of this article, that's, whatever, is an interesting one. And you just hope that people read it and you go, okay, well, I hope you get what I'm getting at here. And like the idea of good faith in saying like, hey, when I'm talking about this, please try and understand the angle I'm talking about it from, and not just, pretending that I'm ripping on something you love or whatever. And it is a weird thing because so many of us too have, it's a strange thing with the internet because so many of us have people we are friends with who we talk to primarily online. Many of us live far away from people. I live very far away from people that I love. And so sometimes I see them on Twitter and that's how I'm interacting with them. And the way that I'm interacting with them on Twitter is different than the way that I'm interacting with someone who just likes my games. And making sure that line gets drawn, and then knowing that at any time, any one of these interactions that I'm having with a friend or something might also just end up in the eyes of, who knows? I don't think there's a way that that's ever going to work without problems unless humanity just gains a whole lot more good faith in each other, and I don't think that's going to happen.
We've kind of obscured what the chud fraction actually is, right? Because it used to just be the one guy at the end of the bar, and he'd get socially ostracized. But now they can all talk to each other, no matter which bar they're sitting in. And that doesn't seem like a net positive.
Something else that comes to mind, and this is sort of like, it always takes me a while for my brain to boot up and remember, because I don't think we said, but I did like over 500 interviews over the last decade, because I was a little worried about what was happening with the internet and wanted to understand. And his name escapes me, but he works for the Social Media Research Foundation, and he said, the internet is so flawed that it has two original sins. I'm sorry, I only remember what one of them is. One of them is that it was designed for this creature that does not exist, which is a human being that always does the right thing and always treats each other like it wasn't designed for the flaws we actually have, and taking that into account.
Well, I think even if that's true, I think there's a weird, I feel like, so we put everybody into this game design of social media that has some pretty bad flaws. It has this like, are you talking to your friend or the news? Kind of both, but it's okay. Don't worry about it. Just be authentic. We have that, and then we have the take out of context button. So you've put people into this kind of toxic game, and like anybody who's played a toxic online game, you develop a way of engaging with it that either makes you safer or makes you more successful in that environment. That's your normal reaction, right? So everybody using social media casually has been doing this. And you can see people do this in two ways. You can have a face-to-face interaction with someone where they make a completely effing normal statement, and then they qualify it in all the different ways that whatever they said isn't actually offensive to anybody for several minutes, right? Or the beautiful boil down online is somebody saying, I hate being on here because every time I say I like pancakes, somebody asks me why I hate waffles, right? But that's the other thing that you get trained to do is like everything being taken out of context, everything being constantly repositioned as an attack on something. I was reminded recently of this amazing sequence in Always Sunny where Charlie Day comes bursting out of the office and he's got this big bundle of papers and he says, I've written a musical. And they're like, what? Why? Because I felt like it. Why? What do you mean? Nobody writes a musical for no reason. He says, what are you talking about? Well, I did, so there. And one of them goes, well, who's it against? He's like, what do you mean, who's it against? They're like, yeah. Who versus? Who's it versus? And it's like end of the scene, right? But like, if you're in this toxic online game that one you often don't realize is an online game and don't realize is toxic, and it is training you in subtle, small ways for a very long time to understand the things that are on it as being versus you in some way. And then you get into this situation that seems insane and impossible, both of these situations of wanting to just say that you like pancakes very much and being accosted by waffle lovers for attacking their identity. And then on the other side, feeling like you have lost the ability to say simple things to even a friend because you're worried about how it might be interpreted in the worst possible situation. But then now, this is like my friend, our game design friend Frank describes this as donkey space, right? Which is like the game is reacting to the way that you're playing it. So now everybody who's playing Twitter is following this new set of rules that the game rules taught them, and now the thing is reacting to that. And now, like, it's a lot.
Like the users invented retweeting, right? It was later built as a feature.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and hashtags, like, I mean, all great games, most of the best features, I think, tend to come from players or tend to be mods, basically. And that's further proof that Twitter is a game. Yeah, I think this evolutionary thing, this like system feeding back into itself, and anytime the main thing you're optimizing for is just number goes up.
Oh, if we didn't clarify, Twitter is now called X.
Oh, sorry. Yes,
So
the
they say.
platform formerly known as Twitter.
I'm not going to call it that.
No, I'll boo it. If
I
someone says
refuse.
X, I will just boo
I
it.
realize
No.
we reached that point where
Same
yeah.
rules as Harry Potter.
I don't
Sorry,
respect
library.
that. I don't respect Elon Musk.
So do you all think that there's any hope for professional moderation? You know, it was something that we had in the early days, right? There are a couple of high-profile examples of trying it, but then like, not to hold up Facebook, but like they couldn't do it at all because the people who had to do that work had to face such horrors all day that it was basically, there was nobody alive who could actually do the work of moderating the incentivized stream of horrors that social media had produced. Is there any hope for moderation?
I don't want to say no, but people have tried and it's hard. There was I think it was after Elon bought X or whatever. Like at some point during the social media breakdown of Twitter, a few folks started up a website called Co-Host, which is like a pretty niche but somewhat popular within certain like nerdy subgroups, essentially like social media website where it's kind of just posting. There wasn't ads. And they tried to do a lot of things with it that didn't work. It ended up not being financially successful, and it fell apart, or we just went down basically. And I know they tried, but they both tried their best, but ran into plenty of problems doing what was essentially manual moderation. They didn't have a huge staff at all. So I imagine like that might be the kind of thing that could work with enough money, but like social media platforms are like, it's very questionable how much money they make in the first place, even when something like Twitter is like fully automated. Like when Musk bought it, Twitter was however many millions of dollars on, like it wasn't making money. I don't think manual moderation is a thing that could happen if it wasn't being like somehow funded and paid for like a lot of people who just wanted to do it because they thought it needed to be done, rather than something that's ever going to be like, I don't think capitalism's going to do it, is the answer for that.
And Reddit's kind of an answer to that. It's back in the day, Slashdot, to a certain extent, as places where the users did moderation work. It wasn't perfect, but it was something.
Yeah, I think it would have to be kind of essentially orthogonal to capitalism, where in Reddit it was a cultural thing and that didn't get stamped out, and I think you can get it that way. I am kind of a design optimist, and I often think like somebody's going to do something like that. It won't be cultural, it'll be systemic. They'll figure out a way of structuring a platform that actually meets people's needs. We sometimes in a friend group. I mean, this is going to sound really nerdy, but there will be a sort of a thought experiment about like what, as game designers, I'm going to sit here and say, oh, this social media platform has bad design, it's toxic. So what would a well-designed system be? What would its qualities be? How would it work? And honestly, a lot of these things would work really a lot like early Twitter, where the earliest iterations of it were opt-in. They were whitelisting based. They had all these qualities that were essentially self-moderating, or at least stemming from social conventions of moderating within your own communities. And those things got kind of slowly phased out over time because they didn't fit in with the kind of growth model or hype or engagement metrics weren't where they needed to be, or other things. But I think I think you'd have to see, people would have to opt out of the other alternatives, I think, before ending up back in one of these things. But I think every time that's rooted in capitalism, it has this tendency to break down over time because it peaks and you're not allowed to do that. It has to keep going, and so whatever things you had in place will have to, the thing will get moved. There's a word for the thing, But
I would love to see it. I would be hopeful for it. I think that what they were trying to do with co-host and things like that, where it was like attempts to make a social media site that is less algorithmic and less driven by, both like just terrible systems or what have you. I would love to see that work. I don't know how that happens, like you said. Like I think it would have to be. It is the kind of design we haven't really seen yet.
yeah,
So.
and as a designer, it's fun for me to think about because I always think about player needs or user needs first, and I always think about the way that I use social media, which is skip past almost everything to the 3 tiny little things that I was actually looking for that day. And as a designer, I always think like, oh, there should be a way where I just get those 3 things right away, and then I can go back and do the thing or whatever. And that seems like a design. That seems like a thing that other people would value too. Like, I think sometimes people are in modes. Sometimes I'm in dog mode. I only need to see pictures of dogs doing hijinks. Vine was built this way. Vine had a dogs button. I don't know if anybody remembers this, but
I do.
It was a precursor to TikTok in a lot of ways, but it had dogs category, and you could just click on it, and it would just show you dogs for like a long time.
Didn't we almost have it all?
Yeah. But I feel like as a user, as a player, that's great. That's a mode of engagement that I want to do. Sometimes I'm in professional mode, and I want to be showing off my work. Sometimes I am in absorb art mode. I want to see everybody else's amazing stuff, and I want that injected straight into my brain for as long as possible. And like as a designer, I have to look at what's out there and go like, none of these things are designed around the idea of interacting this way. I still don't think capitalism is going to make that work, but I know like as a designer, I do see places where like it doesn't, there's no, the main reason it's bad is, or they're stupid and bad reasons. Like the idea of seeing cool things that people are doing or seeing people's stupid dogs or wanting to show people the thing you made. Like early Twitter, one of the reasons it worked, you would follow people and they would advertise their stuff because that was what you wanted to do. You wanted to know when your favorite artist's new book, their new PDF was on the thing or whatever. That was the whole reason you were checking it. That's good for them. That's good for, like, the thing was working. We had it. And I have to think that something like that, it seems like people still want that. Because now everybody goes like, I missed, I didn't even see that your new game was out, or I didn't even see this thing, I couldn't do this. And it's like, okay, well, we're all using this thing that doesn't do the thing that we wanted it to do in the first place, and it makes everybody feel bad. And
I think that's actually, not to cut you off, but I think that's actually the true source of hope right now is people are starting to ask those kind of questions, and we're able to articulate that stuff, and we're able to have these kinds of conversations. 10 years ago, a lot of this stuff around Gamergate, when it happened, like it gave us a language for a lot of stuff that was in the air, including all of the misogyny in like video game land, which was like this thing you would notice but never really was talked about publicly. Maybe it's still not as much as it should be. But this is like the ongoing conversation I have with my friend group where I'm in that position of like, so what are we saying? It's just hopeless. Because I don't want that to be the message, and I think like the internet's going to be a part of maybe our lives for the foreseeable, at least. It's hard to think of life without it. I had a conversation last fall with Leonard Kleinrock, who was in the room for when the ARPANET got switched on, which was the military-built first version of the internet that was housed at UCLA. And then I got to see the actual machine that, as he said, this started your internet, is what he said. And so I think he shares some of that, like, you're a design optimist. I think he's a technologist optimist. And he was saying, all the problems with toxicity today, when you go out and do events, here's what you tell them, AI is going to solve it. And in my head, I said, I'm going to go out and say that, but I don't agree with that. Because I think that gets at the question of, what you're asking, which is this a manual thing to fix? Do we really trust AI to fix it? I think if I keep talking, I'll circle back to why it's hopeless. But I think that's a thing that's in play, and it's up to us. And I think we're in this like crucial moment where, what happened with Twitter was a tragedy. It was a loss of something pretty special. I don't know that I've seen anything like take its place. You know, it just seems like Mark Zuckerberg say yesterday, like social media is over.
Yeah, wearing a hot dog suit, I'm sure.
I wouldn't believe anything he says, but that's just me.
Given the people who are generally in charge of AI and the direction it's going in, I also do not trust it to take care of this for us. I do wonder if we are kind of in like maybe not a post-social media era, but like a dimming of the lights where maybe people recognize that like, okay, social media's been around for a while. It's not like a hot and new thing. It's always, I don't think it's ever going to not exist, but I think people will maybe not. Maybe we start to appreciate it and approach it with a more reticent hand of like, I'm not going to be online as much, or I'm not going to get as invested in this in the same way because of all of these things that are hell about it.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel like the moment where the old world is dying, the new one is struggling to be born.
And I
right?
think it helps to think about what are we going towards versus what killed us.
Yeah, and
So-
I think my design gripe thing is always going to be that I think the way it works currently, it's doing what it's designed to do. It works how it is. That's why it can't be moderated. It's essentially working as intended, and it's not.
Right.
It's in its current form. It's not fixable. So yeah,
Right.
my hope rests in new forms.
Yeah. People always
and-
ask me, yeah, how do we fix social media? And I'm like, it's like asking, like, how do you make poison better for you? It sort of misunderstands the point of it, you know?
No, you put it in sawdust and you take care of it at the correct county facility and
Dispose of it
and you
properly,
use
right,
and
right,
you use
right.
something
And-
else.
yeah.
You use
Bury it
something
in the
else.
hole and run away. Right.
But there could be new things. Whatever the next thing is,
There
I
will be
think
new
could
things.
be cool.
We know there will be.
All right, I want to take a moment, see if we have some questions from the audience. Does anybody have any questions for the panel tonight? Anybody? Let me bring the microphone back to you here.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On your three opinions, which is better, Twitter or Facebook? Meta, or whatever you want to call it. Facebook, of course, in particular. I don't like the meta whole virtual shit that's coming out.
How do you define better?
Like more outreach, better outreach, less AI. You know, all that I said.
Well, I'm one of those people who opted out, so
Like I don't see Facebook being sold anytime soon, like Twitter. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's weird also like per an assessment earlier about like accidentally clumping things together, like even like Facebook and Meta is like 4 different platforms, and well, even just Facebook is the events silo, which is like deeply integrated in human society in a way that we might never get rid of for whatever reason. There's also the garage sale silo in there, and then there's Facebook, the social media platform, is also in there, and they're a little bit hard to separate in some ways. So like, I agree. Like, I think Twitter could be gone in a fire sale, and everybody's IP addresses, auctioned off to Russian agents or something next week, right? Who knows? I think that's less likely to happen at Facebook, which is a little bit more of a foundational thing. I don't know that I would describe Facebook as better than Twitter in a general sense because of that aspect of it or facet of its construction. But I do think I would say I think in a major way, and to me it's black and white. Facebook cannot be extracted from Western society realistically.
Sure.
My opinion, since you shared yours, my opinion is compared to the auto industry, since we're in Detroit. Like you can compare Facebook to Ford, okay? And you can compare Twitter to GM. One went through bankruptcy and the other one stood solid. You understand? They both generate a lot of income, as you can see from the billionaires that own them. But one can be bought and one cannot. For some reason, that's not because it can go away, nobody uses it or nothing like that. Yeah. But like you said, I don't think it's going away anytime soon in the U.S.
Yeah.
Or worldwide, of course. They all use it worldwide more than the U.S. right now, currently with the new generations.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that's that's my 2 cents.
I think in terms of like the average person, they're both slowly crashing trains. And if you are just a person trying to get on the internet, it's, you can hop on them and have a good time, but they're not going anywhere. For the billionaires who own them, it's hard to say. They both really like burning a lot of money on ill-conceived projects. So I don't know which one will burn out first. I'm sure they'll continue to exist for a long time in some sort of form. It's hard to say in terms of that.
I mean,
I will
really-
say- oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, a really good book that just came out is Careless People by Sarah Wynne Williams, who worked on the policy team at Facebook. And she does a pretty good job of running down. There's a chapter towards the back all about like how Facebook ruined one country, and it's not the United States. But there's a pretty good breakdown throughout the book of, she would know, and she covers it pretty well.
I will say, as a public official who maintains 6 social media channels, Twitter is dead as a doornail. Like, there's zero engagement there anymore. I don't even bother to post most of my things. I post to all the other channels because it's like, and I have the largest technical audience there. But because I'm not posting about the things that Twitter wants you to post about, nobody sees it. So, which is fine. That's fine with me. And, the interesting thing about Facebook at this moment is that, you still have relatively good engagement from people you actually know, right? But it's like you look at your average boomer's feed and it is utter slop. Every single post is a completely fake AI image. The whole thing. So it's like, if anything, Facebook is more consumed by AI slop than Twitter is, even though there's plenty of bad actors on Twitter. They're both terrible. I'm really enjoying Blue Sky, actually, at this moment. We'll see where it goes, but at the moment, Blue Sky really seems to have some of that old magic, and I loved when the CEO wore a shirt that made fun of Zuck's stupid Zuck rules the world shirt. All right, other questions from the audience? Thank you for your question. Yes, please.
Thank you.
At the risk of, is this working? At the risk of continuing to talk about the wallpaper when that's what's being talked about, do you have any thoughts or advice on how to engage with people in your life who are actually concerned about the thing that's being talked about that's not really the thing that made you worried? Do you just say that's not really the issue at play here, or do you still talk about it, and how do you handle the balance between those things?
I'll go first, and maybe you have more specific strategies. But my response to Gamergate was taking people away from Twitter, away from the internet, and just, Adam and I and Steve and I also we just talked on Skype, and we just talked like human beings with voice, because you were saying, and I guess posts on Twitter and stuff are longer. It still makes my teeth stand on edge when I see a tweet that's many paragraphs. To me, I got out after before it stopped being 140 characters. But I think even at double the length, it's still not the place for hashing anything out with any nuance. So I think thinking about if there are other channels. I don't know who you're thinking of or what the wallpaper is, but I think it's worth thinking about whether the space is even built to have a meaningful conversation.
Yeah, you want to be talking to a human person, ideally in the same room. And this is gonna be a weird poll, but there is a bat expert named Merlin Tuttle, who I think is just one of the great living humans. And he actually has this weird wealth of experience with this kind of thing because people hated bats. Yeah. So now on Instagram, you can scroll through and somebody's like, we're the bat rescue and we have bats. Look at our cute bats. This is the red bat. It's extra cute. But go back 30 years, 40 years, bats are agents of the devil. Every bat has rabies. Bats are vermin to be exterminated. They're an animal of no value. And this guy, Dr. Merlin Tuttle, made a career out of rescuing bats and being a bat scientist. And so his career takes him, for 20 years, his only interactions with people are people who hate bats, because everyone hates bats. It's like him and his one friend love bats. Everyone else hates bats. So his whole life is only talking to people who have a made-up, bizarre, fake, untrue idea about something that he knows a lot about, and he wants to get people on his side. He wants to bring people over to Team Bat. And his main way of doing it is he would just ask people what they thought about it and why they thought about it. And almost always, it's nothing. They don't know anything about the topic. They don't have an idea. Someone mentioned the topic and said it's bad, and that's about the depth of their thing. And then he sometimes would offer, like, do you want to know more about it? I can tell you more stuff about it if you want. I actually know a lot about it. I do a lot of stuff with bats. And I'm increasingly convinced that if you are talking to somebody who, and there's a way in, and they genuinely, and they're a functional, I don't know, they're a human that you want to do this to or with, however you want to describe it, which is more people than most people think. I like trying to tackle these situations that way, but just because I think it starts from, it's an old teaching thing about problem solution ordering. Like the risk, the danger, one thing that was very true, especially during Gamergate stuff, is the math teacher problem, where you barge into the conversation and go, memorize this algebra, do this thing, pass this test. And the students are going, why? Why am I supposed to do that? What's the point of this? And they won't remember it. They won't be interested in it. They don't want to know how it works or why it works. And I think often it's a much smaller nudge than you might think is necessary to get people to basically blank slate, because they just don't have any information. They're not coming in with a wealth. They haven't memorized all the talking points prepared by the whatever thing. If they have, it might be a lost cause. They might have drunk the Kool-Aid. You're done. I don't know. But I think a lot of the time it's just that, like, what's your worry about ethics in gaming journalism would be the example from 2014, right? And if you ask somebody that, it would be 7 to 8 seconds before they said, I don't know, actually. I just read it and it sounded like something we should worry about. And at which point you say, we should worry about it. Here are examples of places where it really matters. Is that what you're talking about? And they'll go, no, I don't think that was it. But at least you have something. Like, I think you want them to care that, or to recognize that they're missing something. You want them to be solving the problem, and then you can help them solve it. And I think every time you barge in and try to compress the correct thing above, that they try to stop themselves from being squished.
I read a thing about deprogramming that talked about that so few people are able to tolerate being told that they're wrong about anything, that it's much more effective to just basically say, well, I heard this instead. And just like presenting it as like, well, I heard something different, as opposed to, no, you're wrong, that's false, it's bad faith, right? Because so many people are just incapable of processing that in the moment.
Just real quick before I forget, because I know I sort of gave you a mealy-mouthed, non-actionable answer, but a book I really liked is called High Conflict by Amanda Ripley, and she's a conflict mediator, and actually it was like hugely helpful for me to read, because it explains the sort of patterns people get stuck in when they're arguing for things they don't even understand, but they just know they feel very strongly about it. I mean, it's become one of those books, like I reread it once a year, because apparently it's just part of the survival guide of just existing.
I actually might have to read that. I've had to have a lot of conversations like that with a lot of people I know. And I think to some extent the way you approach it has to do with where they're at, and possibly like how deep into whatever they're talking about is. If you were talking to someone who says, maybe there's actually been a lot of research on things like how people get involved in QAnon and how people get really sucked into these dire beliefs that they can't break out of, and that they they've found that basically it is much more difficult to get to a person like that after they have bought deeply into something like that. I think a lot of what you can do is if someone is at a point where they're possibly reading more about that, they're not really sure. I do think something like a face-to-face conversation where you just say, like, hey, this is the way this affects me, or affects people we know, or affects people we love, or whoever, at an earlier stage is probably the most important thing, and it's probably the better way to approach someone who is maybe not deeply invested in horrible opinions, but is maybe adjacent to it in some way. And I do think that you said a little bit about this, Adam, but like the way in which you approach it is a mixture of like kind but firmness, where if someone doesn't know much about it and has just heard about it, it's not something you have to be terribly firm about, right? You can just be like, well, people say that, but actually it's a little more like this, and I think some people misinterpret this, right? Whereas when you start to meet people who tend to be more and more strongly opinionated about this, or insist on, a thing I very dramatically remember from a party I was at ages ago now is there was a guy at the party who seemed to be a nice enough guy, but he kept tossing around a few words that one of the hosts of the party like didn't really have any patience for, rightly so. And so she pulled him over and said, like, hey, you have to stop saying stuff like that, or we will actually make you leave. And she sat him down and talked to him for a while and said, like, look, like, I get it. However, like, what you're saying here is hurting other people. It's causing a problem at the party. Like, there are reasons why you shouldn't say stuff like that. And he eventually kind of got the point, I think. And I suppose there's a little bit of that comes across as peer pressure or something like that. But it's more just a level of setting boundaries and saying, like, hey, this sort of thing isn't acceptable. I think when someone is very deeply involved in that, like they're in QAnon, and you set a boundary like that, then they probably do not react well to that. But I think it takes a level of understanding where they're at and understanding like what that approach would be for that person.
Yeah, I think there is the QAnon, or whatever QAnon has turned into now. One of the mechanisms of that is if somebody puts down boundaries, they're bad and you shouldn't give that anything, and you either run over them or run away from them. Like that's been integrated into, it's like cult for the sake of cult. It's become this really intense, like Ouroboros kind of thing, and that's because that's the main belief of it, essentially. It's been boiled down to don't let people have boundaries anymore or whatever. So that I think that can absolutely just be, that's like professionals have to do that work or something.
Right. I think the essential breakdown of people who have talked about deprogramming people from cult-like thinking, where they truly and absolutely refuse to listen to anyone who sets a boundary for them, or who tries to say, like, I don't want to be around you when you say stuff like this, is either just like an extremely intense amount of one-on-one work in terms of like trying to explain yourself, or like you said, like a professional. I think, unfortunately, the reality for it is to try and catch it early. If you hear people saying like that, saying things adjacent to that, because unfortunately it does get harder and harder as, like you said, like they stop listening.
I think the ideal thing is you're doing this, you're most often going to be doing this for or with someone you care about, and that conversation ideally does include a genuine amount of, you want to know where they got this idea, why they think this. I genuinely believe that if at the start of Gamergate, instead of everybody going like jumping on, thinking that posting that these people are Nazis and we have to get them out helped. If instead of that, so if somebody came into the room and was like, this like nearly homeless person that made a video game one time is taking away my games, and that's why this writer has to be fired from this thing. If the universal response to that had simply been, what are you talking about? Wait, walk me through this. You explain how this works. Take me through step by step so I understand what you're talking about, that we would have made it halfway through those conversations and they would have had to slam down the cult gate or just admit that this was a half-formed set of snappy, prepackaged things that don't hold up to further attention or investigation whatsoever. And I think that is just so often the case. There's a prepackaged, comfortable, useful thing to someone, and they grab it and they don't look at it very closely. And very, very often, especially if you're catching it early and this is someone you care about enough to make this a priority, to just say like, what are you talking about? How does this work? What are you saying? You explain to me in detail how this thing that you just said would happen. Walk me through it. How does this take away your video game? And they won't be able to explain it because it can't happen. And then you're in a great place because you don't have to tell anybody anything. You helped them figure something out that they probably could have figured out on their own. And you did that because you care about them. And you genuinely wanted to know also, yeah, where did you read this again? Because you should treat that with more media literacy or something.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hi. So a lot of the conversations that you were talking about here was effectively getting to people early, communicating with them clearly up front. How do you address people that are lost at the sauce, that are so far gone, well, quote unquote gone? How do you handle that? How do you address some of those?
I think you have to choose whether or not you want that person in your life.
If this is like an online person that you don't even know or whatever, like we were talking about it earlier, but like professionally there's a term, we just call it DNE, do not engage. DNE is the default basic thing that you do for every instance of this. So you're trying to have a reasonable online professional life of some sort and share your work. And Chud's cruising in, doing, oh, you didn't, and you go like, oh, what are we gonna do about this? What you're gonna do about it is nothing because they have no energy. They don't care about this that much. It seems like they do because the language is inflammatory or whatever. They have no energy, no drive. It's not a real hobby for them. They're killing time. It's not a real activity for them. It seems that way to you because the thing they've done is intrusive and you have a lot of empathy or something, right? But it's not real for them. And so you definitely can't treat it as real. You just delete all the stuff so your space is clean and move on. At least online professionally, that would be. And people, in the heat of the moment, nobody thinks that works. We've been doing it for almost a decade now. It works perfectly under all circumstances.
Can I ask, what have you tried?
Frankly, most of this is my family.
I was going to say, because I feel like we're talking about like a hypothetical, but if you make it
Yeah.
specific, maybe we could feel like we're like hosting Loveline now or something. We're like solving people's relationships with the internet.
No, I've spent time talking with family and trying to have different ways of conversation to see where they're coming from and understand where they're coming from. And there are some parts where we can just respectfully disagree that, hey, we just have different core values that you're not wrong, I just don't agree with it. And then it's mixed up in a lack of media literacy that, well, let's take a second to actually listen to what the arguments you're saying with, I mean, we even look at today's political climate, we can see that, like, frankly, I work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. My family is very anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion. Having those, like, trying to understand why and show them, here's what I know and here's why it's not bad the way you are, but it still feels to fall on deaf ears.
Yeah, there's it is definitely a different conversation between whether or not it's someone posting something online. Like Adam said, it's very easy to block somebody and simply never have to engage with someone like that. When it is someone close to you, obviously you're a lot more invested in whether those people get along with you and care about you, and vice versa. I think there is a point, when you say someone is so lost in the sauce and that deep in their invested in their beliefs, I think it does come down to a personal choice of how much you feel like you want to engage with and indulge in those folks. I think, and not to say that everyone should just cut off their family members who, they don't get along with or whatever, but there's a level of how much you personally want to have to deal with that all the time, especially depending on how they treat you and how they, the things opinions they might have on your profession, for example. I think you can do your best in terms of trying to explain to them where you're coming from, why you do the things you do, how you are helping the people around you and helping the people that you're trying to help. And ideally, they would appreciate that. Realistically, I think it is probably similar to what Adam has said about the idea that people are getting half-formed thoughts. And unfortunately, what happens is you can still form an identity around those half-formed thoughts. And once it gets that ingrained, it gets harder to break away from your investment in that identity.
I think a thing you can do for yourself that's I think even a broader mindset that I think includes this is just having ground rules. So on the professional side, our ground rule is just D&E, this is a big waste of time. Ground rules for your family are going to be different. But I think if you don't have them, then it's sorry, I'm a game designer. I think of a lot of things in terms of games. It's just going to happen. But in both making games and playing games, when people don't agree on the rules, then progress is accidental at best, right? So if you have you want to have some kind of shared understanding, not about this political thing or this half-formed thought or this or whatever. You want to have some kind of shared understanding about your autonomy or how is it okay during dinner to say that your job is dumb or not, right? Ground rules about how this kind of thing can proceed. If it's after dinner and there's bourbon and we're on the back porch and you want to get into it, sure, but let's set places, because the thing that's going to happen, the one reason to do this is for your own sanity. The other reason to do this is because if they refuse to acknowledge your ground rules, then that is information that's really important to you about I'm not going to be able to do this process with ground rules. And so this process is going to be fraught. It's going to be much harder to go somewhere with it, to go somewhere healthy or positive or any kind of anything, not about winning or losing, right? But so I think figuring out what that means for you and your family or whoever, whatever the thing is, some set of ground rules, some kind of shared understanding about domains and about when is it okay to do something and how you want to go about that. Again, I would set that because there's no negatives to that. And there is a chance that you will be able to start to tell with whomst can you have ground rules and thus be able to do this and feel like it's okay to do this versus, the possibility that maybe some people aren't going to acknowledge those ground rules. They aren't going to do that. And in that case, at least right? Oh, making progress here is going to be a lightning strike or something because there's not something structuring this.
One other thing that I've read about these situations is that, when chinks start to show in a person's worldview in those sorts of situations, it's so tempting to gloat, right? But really, in many cases, they join these information communities to feel included in something. And when they're starting to dip a toe outside of it, to be as compassionate and caring as possible and welcome them back into the reality-based community, right, as much as you can, even though it must be like, now you love DEI, or whatever it is, right? So, but excellent question. Thank you for your question. All right, we're going to have to wrap up here. Let's have a round of applause for our excellent panel. Thank you so much. David's books are for sale back here. He'll be up here if you'd like to have him sign it, and this will be available online as well. So thank you all so much for coming tonight. Thank you again to our panel, and have a good rest of your evening.